Aloha and welcome to another episode of Financial Education with Hawaii Central Federal Credit Union. I'm Amber Millsap, Community Relations Officer with Hawaii Central, and today we have with us, yet again, Herb Hussey of Windward Financial. Herb is a retirement planner and partner at Windward Financial. He's been at this for many years. 33. Since, and so you retired from American Savings Bank, is that right?
I did. We're going to talk about estate planning today.
Are we?
We are. We are for a few minutes. Let's bring up the first slide. Estate planning is really important, particularly for families, because it involves two things. Most importantly, it involves people. So you have children, especially, you have to figure out what happens if mom and dad are not there. And then the other thing, which can be important too, are the assets. But it's important for people to have a plan. People think it's about buying stuff. It's actually figuring out a strategy if things change. Next slide, please. The key thing is to have a plan. And that's a series of conversations with the people that are there. And the thing that's important about it is that the plan changes as the years go on. When the children are small, the discussion is between mom and dad and more along the lines of, if mom and dad are not here, who takes care of the kids? But as the children age and they make choices, then it's like, all right, as a family, what do we do? And then a later stage is when the children begin their own careers or they have their own families. What does that now mean when we have other people in the dynamic? The last phase is one where the parents are elderly, the children are now settled in their careers or their lives, and then what do they do about that? So estate planning is not singular, it is actually dynamic and it changes over time. The general rule that I've always had estate planning attorneys tell me is this: the plan is effective as long as the staples are not rusted. Mm-hmm. If it's rusted, then you want to go and have someone take a look at it. Next slide, please.
So, though, before we move on, it sounds like we should be thinking about estate planning very early.
Time. Yeah, early and all the time. And the reason is things can change, and they can change dramatically, they can change quickly. Sometimes the changes are for the best. Sometimes they're really hard, very difficult. But we have to have at least a conversation. The three general questions that I suggest to my clients when they look at estate plan is this. First one is, who makes the decisions? Mm-hmm. That simple question. When the children are young, it's, my wife and I are going to make the decision. And when the children are older, maybe it's my wife and I first and our children second. When we're very old, maybe it's my children will make the decision. Mm-hmm. So the first question is, who makes the decision? Next question is, are we going to go big or are we going to go long? Which means that if we have assets to take care of or things that we're going to need, are we going to have a high quality of life that we're going to try to maintain over time? Or are we going to say we can only have these assets and we're going to go for as long as we can? Mm-hmm. So the discussion is, in that case, it's, are we going to have a big life or a long life? Mm-hmm. The last question is, what's off the table? And what that means, for example, if we're going to give the house away to a child, then the house is not something that's going to be used as an asset to take care of ourselves when we're older. Mm-hmm. So those three questions: who makes the decisions? Are we going to go big or are we going to go long? And last one is, what's off the table? Those are the three questions that I use. Next slide, please. The key relationships. An estate planning attorney is critical. You want to have that relationship with someone. And lawyers, they specialize. So you want to have a conversation with someone who is an estate planning attorney. You want to have a conversation and a relationship with a good accountant, not necessarily the tax preparer, but someone who can give you long-term advice about what does your estate plan look like, what are the taxes, that are involved in it? What are the assets that you have? Preferred care provider, that would be the doctor. You want to have a conversation with them. And if the doctor says, we need a document from you about how we will treat you if you're very sick, you want to make sure they have that. Mm-hmm. So those key questions are there. Those people are very important in any family.
And this isn't an exhaustive list, but
No.
those are three key.
Yes, and the it could be more people, more advisors that you rely on. It could be a few, and over time things can change. You say, well, I want to work with that person. I don't want to work with that one. Because this discussion that the family has is an ongoing story that they are creating about themselves. In other words, the question they're always asked is, what happens if?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would think you, as a retirement planner, are part of estate planning, right?
I'm part.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not the only part there is. They should have an estate planning attorney. They should have a good tax person to work with them, and they should have an ongoing relationship with their doctor. Mm-hmm. All of those people should be involved. And if the person says, you know what, I'm not going to talk to anybody, I'm going to make my own decisions, then okay. But we then are cutting ourselves off from people that have expertise. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Next slide. You can consider different things to be part of your estate plan from the retirement planning side. Life insurance with an accelerated benefit rider is an important thing if you need life insurance. Long-term care or a funeral plan. Go back to long-term care for a second. Long-term care, it's not a purchase, it's a strategy. And what we're talking about then is the question of, okay, if mom is sick and she needs to be home and have someone to take care of her, or if she needs to be in an adult care setting or an assisted living facility, what does that mean? It's very important to have that discussion. It's not a purchase, it's a strategy. Because one of the most difficult things to try to figure out is, what are we going to do for mom when we've never had that discussion? Mm-hmm. And that's where families argue and fight and they come apart, because something as critical of this as this oftentimes occurs without the family ever having discussed it. And that's always a very tough place for it to be.
I think both you and I have been in that situation.
Yes, we have. Yes, we have. And those kinds of fights are permanent.
And I wouldn't have expected you to be in that situation, though, Herb.
All the time. Because, things happen and families are having to adjust. It's complicated. Next slide. Documents, wills, trusts, beneficiaries, advanced healthcare directives, power of attorney, all of those documents and all of those terms are important. A will is basically a document that says you want this thing to go to that person when you die. A trust is actually, you are creating another entity that you can change over time. That's why it's a living revocable trust. And then when you pass away, that trust now becomes permanent. It becomes locked. So the things that you want done, they lock when you die. The beneficiaries are the people that are going to receive the assets that you have. Some of the beneficiaries are primary. They receive that entity upon your death. Other beneficiaries are contingent, where if that first beneficiary is not available or has passed away, then the contingent beneficiary has it. One of the most difficult things to deal with is a situation where the person passes away and there is no named beneficiary. Then it's going to fall under the control of the intestate laws of the state of Hawaii. The law is going to determine what happens there. It's better for the person to have made that choice and chosen their own beneficiary. Mm-hmm. Advanced healthcare directives, that's related to the medical care they have. That's something the doctors have to have on file when you are sick and you're there. They need to have your idea, your wishes clear to them.
And is this the same document that they say to keep on? I mean, I've heard people say you should keep on your fridge in case EMS, there's an emergency situation and they know what to do and what your wishes are.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And the reason it happens is incidents like this can occur very suddenly. And when it goes down, you have to be able to say to the professional, this is what dad wanted. How do you know this? Now, if the doctor is not the person that took care of dad, it's much harder. Mm-hmm. So you want to have that. Mm-hmm. Power of attorney, guardianship, conservatorship, those are all related to the court system. And as the person's physical condition changes and becomes more complicated, then there's more focus on what is needed there. Power of attorney can be revocable. The person says, no, I don't want to let you have that control over it anymore. Guardianship is you're in charge of that person, but conservatorship basically says, you know what, I'm the one that's going to make those choices. When you get into those areas, conservatorship and guardianship, then those are court decisions. You're going to the courts for that.
That means you haven't made decisions up front.
Or the situation has overcome the person.
Oh, okay.
And they don't know exactly what can be done. And they're basically saying, well, the wife stands up and says, I want this for him. And they go, well, how do we know that you are in charge of that? I'm going to be his conservator. Mm-hmm. So that's a court order.
I see. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, it's complicated. Next slide. Yes, know your beneficiaries. Really, really, really important, because you can change your beneficiary up to the moment you pass away, but once you pass away, you cannot. And it creates all kinds of problems if the beneficiary cannot be found, or if the beneficiary is unknown, or if the beneficiary isn't listed. The worst case I've ever seen was one where, when they went to look at the document for an account, there was no named beneficiary. Like,
or
what?
An ex-husband, ex-wife.
Those are awkward. Those are awkward. But to me, the worst scenario is one where there isn't one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are awkward moments where the beneficiary is someone that is known only to the owner of the account and no one else.
Or maybe they forgot to change after they
changed direction.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Know the beneficiary. It's really important. Next slide, please. One of the important things that happens with the retirement planning and estate planning is that you can reduce the tax burdens of things. Okay. For example, real simple one. If you have an IRA that you own, and you want to pass that to someone, if you give that IRA at your death to your spouse, they inherit that IRA as if it was their own. So if the spouse inherits it as if it is her own, she is not required to make any distributions and pay taxes on it until she's 73 or 74, depending on what the law is at the time. However, if you give that IRA to anyone else that is not your spouse, like your brother, your sister, your child, what happens is that is now an IRA where it is non-spousal. That timeline for that person to hold on to that IRA is much shorter, maybe 10 years, and then they have to liquidate it.
Oh.
Yeah, so we want to have thoughtful discussions with, like that CPA who says, if you name your wife as the beneficiary, she can inherit the IRA as if it were her own. She doesn't have to take the money out until she's in her 70s. But if you give it to your kid, one of the difficulties is that they may have to liquidate the whole account within 120 months.
Well, what if you don't have a spouse and your kids are basically your first choice? Your
first choice is that. But if you do not have children and you don't want to make the beneficiary a child, consider a charity. Mm-hmm. A school, a church, a civic organization that does work within the community that you value, and name them as the beneficiary. Because remember, everything we have is going to be somebody else's at some point. Mm-hmm. We never get to keep it. So if we hold on to things with the idea that I don't want to give it away, eventually it will go away. So if you do not have family that you want to provide for, you don't have that need or that desire, consider a charity.
And the reason you say not a child or a young child would then have to pay the penalty then on this IRA, which is
the difficulty is
how
what
much is
happens
that?
if you name the IRA and the child and the person you're giving it to is below the age of majority. They're a kid. They're a child. I don't know how specifically they will deal with that, but I do know it becomes complex when the person who is the beneficiary is below the age of majority. So it's important to have conversations about these things because, again, these are not purchases; these are strategies. We have to think about them, and time changes as we age. Next slide, please. Keep the records in one place. Digital records are important. Keep the records up to date. One of the most complicated things I've seen adult children deal with is that dad's in the hospital, something has happened to him. Mom's over there with dad, and the adult children are trying to find documents in the house related to dad's care or dad's finances. And one of the most complicated things I've had is adult child asked was, I need to go, but I don't even know dad's social security number. And I don't know where to find it. And I'll say, do you know where dad keeps all of his records? Yeah, you know the filing cabinet? Go look for a tax return. He goes, well, it's an old one. Social security numbers don't change. All you need to do is find one tax return. In fact, if you find a tax return, right, what you find is the social security number, then you find all of the accounts he has. Because all of those documents are there. I don't know where the account is. Who's his CPA? Go ask him. Where does he bank? Go ask them. They have all those records. And to get that conversation going, you have to have a power of attorney. So one of the key things, particularly for adult children stepping into that situation where they're trying to help their parents, is what do you know about mom and dad so that you can find the information to help them? Okay. And real simple one is, what's dad's social security number?
I've been through this situation myself, and it was a nightmare.
Yep.
Just trying to find those documents, and come to find out there really were no documents.
Yes.
And so I was just on a wild goose chase looking for documents that did not exist.
If you have any question about your dad's finances, what would be the one thing in the house that you would look for?
No, I definitely think your advice to look for that tax return is good.
Another really good one is this. Did dad ever send you a check for anything? Yeah. What bank? Go to the bank. And when you go to the bank, the key thing is to tell them exactly dad's situation. Do not fudge it. If dad is in the hospital because he had a stroke, tell them that. Don't walk in and have somebody ask, how's your daddy go? Oh, he's fine. No, tell them what happened. Because if you tell them what happened, the next thing they're going to do is say, okay, we can provide this information, but we cannot go further than that unless you have a court order. But you want to be really honest, because if they find that if you're not candid with them, they stop helping you.
You become suspect.
Of course. Yeah, it's like, who are you? We don't want to talk to you. Next slide, please. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. What do you think probate is?
Isn't it a court proceeding?
It's a waiting period. It's really what it is. It's a waiting period to decide who's going to get certain stuff. The reason it takes so long is because they're waiting for people that may have a claim on the estate to show up, so they have to publish it. That's probate. Certain things will avoid probate immediately, like if you have an IRA that has a named beneficiary, it avoids probate. If you own property jointly with someone, it avoids probate, right? If you have a checking account with your daughter, avoids probate, right? Certain things will end up in probate because they're owned just by that person. Okay. So the big selling point is you want to avoid probate, but when you think about what most people have, right? An IRA, our IRA is going to avoid probate because it has a named beneficiary on it. That's why it goes back to the question, who's the beneficiary? If it's somebody you don't know, or they changed, or the person died, then it's very complex.
That's why make sure those staples are shiny.
Yeah. If you got a bunch of old documents that go back 20, 30 years, like, oh no.
Yeah. Do you have anything else that you want to leave us with? Any imparting thoughts?
The only thing I would suggest when it comes to estate planning is realize it's not a one-time discussion. And it's important to have that ongoing discussion as people's lives evolve. If you think of when people begin to be self-reflective, they are self-reflective when there is a milestone in their life, when they have children. That's a very important one. When the children are older, when the children start having spouses, when they themselves begin to become too old. So as these events occur in life, that's when to have the conversation. One of the most important questions I was ever asked by a really good friend who was an estate planning attorney was really simple. He said, when you deal with your children, are you intending to be fair or equal? And I went, what is the difference? And he said, the difference is profound. See, if you're equal, it means that if you have $1 million and there's 4 kids, everybody gets $250,000 regardless of anything. You're equal. Everybody gets an equal share. But he said, is every child the same? No. Then are you sure you want to be equal? Maybe it's more important to be fair. So the child that you've helped along the way because they needed help, maybe they receive their inheritance now. And the child that did not have those opportunities or those issues, maybe their inheritance comes later. Okay, so that's one of the things that I've tried to think about over the years is when we look at the people we love and we have our assets, are we going to treat them equally, or are we going to treat them fairly? It is harder, but more important to treat them fairly.
Yeah. I mean, I am going with equal right now, personally, but I do think about fairness.
Yeah.
It is important. And I think when my mother was asking us, it was like, I don't need anything, and I did think about one of my siblings might need more. But yeah, it's something to think about definitely when you have children.
And it is true. As the family changes and evolves, that question takes on different nuance. When they are children, you cannot treat them fairly because their needs seem to be pretty much the same. But as they grow and they change, fair might be the better way. Equal. For example, if we have a home, we all, we have a home in Hawaii, it's all $1 million, and we have 4 kids. And the question is, what are you going to do about the house? Okay, everybody gets a fourth, and because that's what I want. It's fair. My response is, then none of them are going to buy that house. They're all going to move to Vegas. He goes, what do you mean? They all part owner. They're all part owner, but you look at the part they own. They own 25% of a house, and the part they own, they cannot buy out their siblings. So you're guaranteeing in that scenario they'll never buy the house. The house is going to be sold. Well, what we're going to do? Who wants the house? She does. What about the other? They live someplace else. They're doing something else. Then try to figure out how to make this thing fair.
Well, it looks like we're done.
Power again.
No, but with that, I do want to say thank you, Herb, again for being with us. And I want to thank everyone at home for joining us for another episode, as well as Olelo Community Media in the background for everything that they do. And with that, I want to say mahalo and a hui ho.